Hi there. Lofty, when we were working together on the bodyguard courses, we used to chat quite a lot, and he always had quite a low opinion of officers. And one night, I asked him if there were any officers that he really rated highly, and he had to think about it. He came up with about eight in his 26-year career, and among them was John Slim, Henry Lee, and Duke Perry. But top of the list was John Woodhouse. And the book we're going to talk about today is The Keystone of 22 SAS, the, the story of John Woodhouse by Alan Hoe. Now, Spike Hoe served in the regiment for many, many years, knew John Woodhouse very, very well. And one of the things Spike Hoe did, he ran ops research. And his book is a highly detailed story. There's no way I can do it any kind of justice really in a review. It's so packed with information on every aspect of John Woodhouse's life. He was the son of a senior army officer, and he served in World War II. Uh, uh, he commanded the East Sussex Regiment, and he was awarded the Military Cross. The adventures in the book, his wartime adventures alone, make him a legend. Then in 1950, he he joined the SAS in Malaya, and initially as the intelligence officer. And at the time, the SAS was run by Mike Calvert. It had been disbanded. Mike Calvert had commanded the SAS brigade at the end of World War II and presided over the disbandment, but he was delighted to be able to um, sow the seeds for his resurrection, initially with the Malaya Scouts in the Malayan campaign against the communist terrorists. They were a Chinese based organization. And one of the things that Mike Calvert said to his officers was, "Sins of commission I could forgive, sins of omission never. There are far too many officers afraid to make a decision, looking for the rules before they do a bloody thing." And Woodhouse summed up his opinion of Mike Calvert. He dominated all of us. None of us in experience, prestige, personality, even age, came anywhere near him. In consequence, he was a very lonely man. He greatly admired Australians, seeing in them a resurgence of the old pioneering spirit of Britain. He really believed in the British Commonwealth. His faith and enthusiasm was infectious and exhilarating. Ideas flowed from him in a way which I have never heard from anyone else in the army. So he eventually served time in all of the squadrons in the SAS at the time. He was initially sent to A Squadron. Then, when the Rhodesians arrived, C Squadron under Peter Wall, he was the link between them and the rest and A Squadron. And then the newly arrived B Squadron, who'd been recruited in the UK from a territorial unit that was set up there, which was affiliated to the Artist Rifles, and it became the SAS Reserve. And so this had quite a few guys who had served in the wartime SAS, and also guys who had served in other units or in the territorial army. And initially, they were slated to go to Korea, but instead a decision was made to send them to Malaya. And there was immediate conflict really because they saw the existing SAS A Squadron mainly as an ill-disciplined rabble, and the commanding officer returned to the UK. So John Woodhouse took over B Squadron. So after that, he was then sent to the UK, and the UK arm of the SAS was had a holding and draft H&D company, which was at the Airborne Forces Depot in Aldershot, and it it was a sorry affair because the Airborne Forces didn't know what the SAS did because they were out in the jungle. And because at that time the SAS were not an airborne unit, they were despised. And Woodhouse reorganized that and started getting them proper rations and accommodation and so on. He then went to organize with Dane Newell, who um, had been a squadron commander in the SAS and also in the SOE during the Second World War. They sort of had quite a few ideas about how the SAS should be set up, and one of the things was there should be a selection process. So John Woodhouse goes up to Snowdonia, scouts the area, and sets up what, in his words, was a rudimentary course, and put the guys through it. He then spent a couple of years attached to a territorial unit, um, a non-special force in Dorset, and then he decided he wanted to go back to the SAS, but he insisted on taking selection. And so by this time, selection had moved to the Brecons, and what they did then, and they changed it later, but they started off with basically the endurance march. And there was a senior NCO whose nickname was the Gloom, Ross, who just told the guys, keep up with me. And off they went for something in the region of 20 hours at a cracking pace. And Woodhouse managed to keep up with him and was one of a handful who passed. And the pass rate over the years has been more or less consistent, no matter how they change things. And obviously, they changed things, so they put endurance at the end. So you had a number of other test marches, uh, and then they added extra weeks of build-up training and so on. At the end of the day, the pass rate remains the same. So he goes back to Malaya, and he is put in charge of D Squadron. And one of the things that, he goes through his parachuting course. The SAS had the idea of inserting into the jungle by parachute, which was probably one of the most dangerous things ever, tree jumping. They had special equipment to lower themselves because the trees in the jungle out there can be over 100 feet, well over 100 feet tall. So does his parachuting, and he takes over D Squadron. And one of the things that he did, they captured some prisoners, and they found out that what the prisoners, what the what they call CTs, communist terrorists, Chinese, did was they would hold a meeting, and every man had a voice, and then the commander would make a decision on what they were going to do. And John Woodhouse called this a Chinese parliament, and he thought it was a brilliant idea and instituted it initially in D Squadron, and it spread through the whole SAS, where it remains to this day. And that's the origin of the term Chinese parliament. It came from the Chinese as a good idea. And in this day and age where you can't refer to the Chinese virus, um, it still remains a term in use. So his career goes on. There's the Radfan, there's all sorts of campaigns. He eventually becomes commanding officer of the SAS in Borneo, which was a terrific campaign, and they they had the distinction of winning that campaign like he did in Malaysia. So the SAS was seen as a success. It teetered on the brink of disbandment on many occasions. Another thing Woodhouse instituted was exchange training with US Special Forces, and that's a very interesting thing. So after his military service, he got involved with WatchGuard, which was David Sterling's security setup, doing military type operations in the private sector, including close protection and that kind of thing, in various parts of the world. One of the interesting things in the book was Brian Robinson, who was the commanding officer of the Rhodesian SAS, wrote to John Woodhouse, and the letters in the book, asking for advice on how the Border Scouts operated. And Brian Robinson had done an attachment to Hereford before UDI and was very much enamored of 22 SAS's way of doing things. And he got a reply from John Woodhouse, who sent him out the documentation that how the Border Scouts had set up the system. So he was always willing to help people in that way. Absolutely terrific book. The title of the book, The Keystone of 22 SAS, is spot on. He's without a doubt the most admired officer they've ever had. And as I said, I can only skim over the man's illustrious career and the detail of it in this book, which I can't recommend highly enough.